I know I promised something very exciting for tabletop role-playing fans, and this is not that. Sorry. That's still coming up though. It's probably gonna be the first video of next year, so stay tuned. Hello there, I'm Judith, welcome to my channel. Today's topic is by far the nerdiest film I've ever seen, and it is genuinely my favorite at the moment, until the sequel comes out. I'm talking about a film that came out quite recently called Frogs. It's available for free on YouTube, so naturally I will leave all the necessary links where links go. I will also preface that I did send my script to the director, just to make sure I'm not saying anything that's factually inaccurate or anything. But I promise you that this has no influence on the opinions I express. Anyway, Frogs is the fifth production by Iuvenalis Pictures, which is a collective of amateur filmmakers, though the amateur bit is arguable these days. They started years ago as students who wanted to make a parody murder mystery film, and they kinda just kept making stuff. They made a total of 3 of these detective films, and they also did a play about Erasmus, in Latin. These people did a play in Latin. So let's just say that I wasn't surprised when they announced that they were making a film in ancient Greek. Impressed, but not surprised. And having seen everything they made before, it's clear that they only keep getting better and better at making films. And I also know that while these people may still be amateurs when it comes to filmmaking, they are professionals when it comes to classic languages. So if they made a film in ancient Greek, it couldn't not be good. Suffice it to say, I was kind of excited. And I can honestly say that I was not disappointed. So it's called Frogs because obviously a film that prides itself on being the first movie in ancient Greek is gonna have a title in English. I do get it though. If they'd call the film Batrachoi, people might get confused. Anyway, I recommend watching it for yourself if this kind of nerdity is your thing. Don't worry, there are subtitles available. I think there's very few people in the world who could watch Frogs without subtitles and actually understand what they're on about. For those of you who have already seen it or don't care enough to sit through it, let's talk about the plot. So, spoiler alert going forward. The film opens with an impressively simple line in ancient Greek, where the filmmakers state that they are amateurs with limited means but a big love for Greek culture, which is technically true. But I think it's mostly just to excuse things like the horse, which is just a toy horse on a stick, or the frogs and the mice, which are obviously just humans in costumes. And I'm not shaming them for that, because obviously that's how they do that. All I'm saying is that from a viewer's point of view, those are the only things that separate this from how professional filmmakers would have done it. Then they tell the story of how frogs and mice got into a war with each other, illustrated with some beautiful drawings in sand. It's honestly a great way to tell the story, because it's quite important to the rest of the story, but it can't really be shown literally by amateur filmmakers. They could have just shown, I don't know, landscapes, while someone just tells the story, but adding those illustrations makes it a lot more fun and engaging. After that prologue, the actual film starts. Frogs follows 2 brothers, Dionysos and Heracles. You may have heard of them. Dionysos has decided to travel to Hades, not the god, but the place, the underworld, because the tragedy writer Euripides has recently died, and Dionysos feels that the world now lacks writers of any quality. So he wants to go to the underworld and bring Euripides back, because Uncle Hades will definitely allow that. Anyway, Heracles has of course already been to the underworld, so Dionysos asks him the way. So then Dionysos goes on his way to the underworld, along with his slave Xanthias, and they kinda banter back and forth a bit, they complain, and they try to prank each other. Gonna be honest, not a fan of these kinds of jokes, but maybe that's just me. And I guess it's also just a complaint for Aristophanes rather than Iuvenalis. Eventually they get to a lake, where they meet the eponymous frogs. And that's where we learn this film's a musical. I guess just making a film in ancient Greek wasn't challenging enough. Now, as amazing as this is, there is a problem here. Because these songs are earworms. They get stuck in your head on repeat. And since most people don't really know the words, you really just get one word you do understand, which is an onomatopoeia, on repeat in your head. It gets annoying to be singing brekekekeks koaks koaks to yourself the whole time, I can tell you. Meanwhile, Heracles gets a visitor. It's a friend of his called Admetos, who is a little bit very sad, because he recently lost his wife Alcestis. So they get drunk together, and Heracles promises to go to the underworld to bring Alcestis back. I mean, Dionysos was already on his way there, but it's not like he could just send him a quick text to also pick up Alcestis while he's there. So Heracles promises to go get her. Tomorrow. And then we get a scene where Heracles has his arm around Admetos while he praises the goddess Aphrodite. A bit later, they go to bed together. And I know I'm not the only one who saw that and went a little bit gay. And it was just too obvious to be an accident. You know, they couldn't just be roommates. So I asked the director, who then confirmed that they intentionally made the film quite gay. Which only makes me like it more. Meanwhile, Dionysos and Xanthias have been roped into a party with some mice and their priestess Diotima. I mean, Dionysos is the god of alcohol, so this should really surprise no one. But at the party, Dionysos hears Xanthias and Diotima talking about love and poetry, and he realizes that they may not need to get Euripides back. So they abduct Diotima. They straight up bind her and put a bag over her head and bring her back to Heracles' place. Thing is, Heracles instantly recognizes Diotima as Alcestis. Apparently, she couldn't live without Admetos, but she didn't mind being a priestess to some mice and to praise herself. Look, making Diotima and Alcestis the same person is a good move for the story, especially to bring the different plots together. I'm just saying that it makes for some weird consequences if you think about it a little too hard. Basically, Heracles doesn't have to go to the underworld to get Alcestis, because his little brother just accidentally did it for him. So they reunite Alcestis and Admetos in a pretty hilarious way, and everyone is happy, right? Wrong, because that also means Dionysos doesn't have a poet anymore, sending him basically back to square one on his own quest. At this point, some mice show up, because if you remember from the opening of the film, they have beef with the frogs, who have secretly been living with Heracles. Apparently. Not sure why they did it, but a bit earlier, they had a scene singing to Admetos, and apparently that's them moving in. Yeah, I did not get that at all, but maybe that's just me. Anyway, battle. The frogs and the mice battle it out just outside of Heracles' house, and Heracles, Dionysos, Xanthias, Admetos and Alcestis watch. That's a lot of characters considering a classic play had like 3 actors. So they watch and they don't like who's winning, so they decide to interfere. And then we see a guy wearing Heracles' signature lion robe running into battle. At this point, we don't know who he is, but he could be either Heracles, for obvious reasons, or Dionysos, who's been wearing the robe the entire film. So who do you think it is? Heracles or Dionysos? Turns out it's secret option 3, Xanthias. Probably not too surprising to anyone who's read the Iliad. Apparently, both gods were too lazy to go fight some critters, so it's Xanthias fighting, and he gets himself mortally injured by some critters. So Heracles has had enough and goes to slaughter them, while the king of the frogs speaks the immortal line Molon Labe, which is a reference to the Battle of Thermopylae. You know, that thing with Leonidas and at least 300 Spartans against the Persians. Meanwhile, the others take care of Xanthias and try to get him to not die, because Dionysos has now realized that the poet he's been looking for the whole time is Xanthias, and he doesn't want to go back to the underworld again. I mean, he doesn't literally say so, but I assume. I wouldn't. It ends with Xanthias dressed in a laurel wreath and Dionysos, looking kind of drunk, riding after her to save the city with the good writing. I think. He might be going to the underworld. The ending is a bit ambiguous, but I think that's on purpose. So if you know a thing or two about ancient Greek literature, you may have noticed that this plot is a combination of a couple of classic Greek texts. Specifically, Frogs draws from 4 sources, which it stitches together with a bunch of lines that they wrote themselves, to make the impressive tapestry of a film that we can now watch. These sources are the eponymous Frogs by Aristophanes, Alcestis by Euripides, which I find a little ironic, Symposion by Plato, and of course the Batrachomia Magia. Each of these sources also represents a different genre of Greek literature, but I'm not getting into that here. If you want to know more, ask your local Greek teacher. Frogs was a comedy, a play written by Aristophanes, arguably the best known comedy writer of ancient Athens. The play is about Dionysos and his slave Xanthias going to the underworld for Euripides. It's called Frogs because these ancient plays always had a choir, which in this case took the role of the frogs, which is also why it's so fitting that this film is a musical. Frogs was first performed at the Lenaea, the Athenian festival for comedy plays, in 405 before the Common Era, and unsurprisingly that's also the year it takes place in. Which is why the filmmakers made sure to match their pronunciation of the ancient Greek to the pronunciation in 405 BCE exactly. Because newsflash, pronunciation evolves over time, so these people reconstructed the pronunciation of that exact year. Meanwhile, I'm here using my half-remembered pronunciation I learned in high school, over 10 years ago. Alcestis was a play by Euripides, who was a tragedy writer, but Alcestis was apparently written to be more of a comedy or satire, while still being a tragedy. I haven't seen or read this one, but it appears to be somewhat different from how it appears here. Sorta. The parts they used are pretty accurate as far as I know, except that in the play, Heracles visits Admetos, and in the film, it's the other way around. I don't care though, because the way they stitch them together is actually quite brilliant. Symposion is a book by the philosopher Plato, you know, the Olympic wrestler and the apprentice of Socrates. It's about a bunch of men at a party, including Socrates, Alcibiades and Aristophanes himself. Small world. These guys basically take turns monologuing about Cuprin, love. Now, none of this happens in the film as such. Like, these characters are nowhere to be found. But there is another party where people talk about love in the film. And in Symposion, Socrates says that he learned what he's telling them from a priestess called Diotima. So that's where she comes from. And the Batrachomia Magia is an epyllion, or short epic. Specifically, it's a parody of the classic epics, like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So the Batrachomia Magia, which really just means the frog and mice war, by the way, is about a war between frogs and mice. Ancient writers weren't very creative with their titles, but as you've probably realized, this is where that entire war plotline comes from. I can't be clear enough about this. This is a real ancient Greek text about a war between frogs and mice that actually exists, and it's amazing. I will say that sometimes this makes for a weird shift in the vibes. Like, it'll go from a tragic story about a god traveling to the underworld to get a rider or a friend's wife, to an epic tale about a war between frogs and mice. I mean, it makes sense within the story, but it is very different, and it can be a weird shift. Not that it matters, because it's a lot of fun either way, and it does make sense within the story. Mostly. One thing I don't really understand is how anthropomorphic these critters are supposed to be within the story. Like, putting aside that they are clearly humans in costumes. Within the canon of the story, are they supposed to be big and anthropomorphic as well? Or are they as small and animally as their real world counterparts? Because they seem to be depicted as actual animals, and they're apparently small enough to secretly be living with Heracles. But on the other hand, they're also strong enough to threaten Dionysos and Xanthias, and even injure Xanthias badly. Now, I didn't know this, but apparently this ambiguity is kind of a thing in classic comedy, so it's on purpose. Good enough for me. You may be wondering why they published this film for free on YouTube. Why not sell it to Netflix or something? Well, apart from it being a lot and hard work to do that, I assume, there is a really good reason why they would make it available easily and freely. Because this was made for educational purposes. They made this to be shown in educational circumstances, like classes, to raise awareness and to help in the education of ancient Greek. There's even a bundle specifically made to accompany the use of the film for teachers. I'll leave a link below, though I'm pretty sure it's only available in Dutch for now. I hear they are working on a bundle in English though, so look out for that. The film was even sponsored by an organization called Elliniki Agogi. I'm probably mispronouncing that. A modern Greek institution in Athens, dedicated to teaching ancient Greek. I did read the bundle they made, and it definitely adds value to the whole thing. Like, even as a casual viewer, it gives me a lot of information that makes me appreciate and understand the film even more. There is one thing that I don't quite agree with though. Hear me out. The bundle goes over the structure of a classic tragedy and says that the film follows that structure as well. And it mostly does. But I disagree that the so-called parodos of the film is really a parodos in the classic sense. What I understand a parodos is, or is meant to be in this context, is like an intro to the story, where the choir sings their first song. And that's not what this is. I mean, it's a good intro to the film, and by virtue of its position in the film, it is by definition the parodos. But I feel like that's mostly just because a film needs an intro. Now, I'm not trying to diminish the choices they went for, because it works and it's beautiful, but I do think it would have been better if they had stuck to that song aspect as well. Not only because the songs in this are really good, and it would have been a really nice parallel to classic tragedies, but also because that way it's instantly clear that this is going to be a musical. Now we find that out a good while into it. As it is, it's good and it's impressive, but I think calling it a parodos is tenuous at best. So basically, I'm not really the intended audience for this anymore. I mean, obviously it's meant to be enjoyed more widely than classrooms, so in that regard I am. This is very much my kind of nerdity, so I really hope they keep making stuff like this. But for now, I think that's all I have to say about it. So it's about time for the YouTube thing. You know the drill. Everything you can do to help the channel is in the end screen right here. If you don't know what to comment, how about this? What did you think of the film? Are there other films or other media that may be similar to this? What's your favorite nerdy film? Let me know down below. For now, thanks for watching.